Good morning, folks. Egnards here to talk to you a little bit about the Battle for Naboo raid. Now, the raid has been out for about maybe 2.5 weeks at this point, and there's been a lot of coverage on battle compositions and how to get the max scores. That's not what I'm here for. That's not what I do. I'm here for the math. I'm too lazy to figure out compositions. What I will say is that working on this project, I worked closely with the Star Wars Galaxy of Heroes raid server, and their liaison to me, Belloc 56. And if you're looking for raid composition, you're looking for how to maximize your scores, you're looking for how to effectively win the battles, that's where you're going to want to go. These guys are great. They come up with just about everything that you're going to possibly need through their server. They do a ton of testing, low gear, high gear, everything in between. And beyond that, we've gotten quite a few screenshots through Reddit and through my own Discord when we're talking about what is viable and what is not viable. So I'll leave in the description of this video a link to their Discord server, and if that's something that you're looking for, I highly recommend you jump on, say hi, and check out their infographics. What I want to talk about is a little bit different. I'm more interested in how I can get my guild, and hopefully your guild, to go back to getting the crate they were receiving in the Speeder Bike Pursuit raid, right? That's the goal. We know that most guilds have dropped 2 or 3 crates. They're hurting on MK3. They're frustrated trying to figure out what's going on, how to get back to the rewards that they were getting before. That is where I come in. So here we have just the raw data, right? You can look at your box for what you guys were doing in Speeder Bike Pursuit. You can match it up to Battle for Naboo, kind of see the average battle amount or the average contribution amount that each member would need in order to get there. And you can compare that to where your guild is now. That's not the bread and butter. I wouldn't make a whole video just on that itself. That's the raw data. We have a couple things that I want to talk about first. The first thing is our expected team compositions, right? This is probably what you're going to see a lot of the time, whether they're the best things or the worst things. You're going to see that Maul 3-man lead, which really works at the higher relic tiers. And then you're going to see something like a B2 Sith Seppi's team, more in those mid tiers. And believe it or not, from what I'm told, at the lower tiers, it really doesn't matter who the leader is. That's neither here nor there. That's not my specialty either, all right? And finally, I want to talk about my reverse tier list. And this is important because if you're watching this video and you're at 8 million, 9 million, 10 million, you're in a guild that's at 550, 600 million, you're not going to look at this reverse tier list and really even care at all, right? You're going to want to go for the characters of the best characters, the best return on your investment. You have the resources to acquire things that players on the lower end just don't have the resources to acquire. This is going to be a little bit more useful for players at the much lower end of the game. And it's a reverse tier list because it doesn't read the same way that we would normally expect. For example, why is Jar Jar Binks? Why is Queen Amidala? Why is Cam in the D tier? And why the hell is R2-D2 in the S tier? And let me explain. D tier here is really just the hardest characters to acquire. So these are characters that are currently time gated in some way or another, whether through conquest, whether through territory battles, whether through a journey event. Our C tier characters are the characters that are not yet accelerated. So these are characters that are currently farmable, except for Master Qui-Gon, who hopefully in this next week should be farmable. Are Kyrotech heavy investments, and are going to take a little bit longer for players to acquire without using their crystals or without spending cash. Our B tier characters are our characters that are not so great outside of the game, but overall they are accelerated. So these are characters that you can quickly acquire. Just about all of them, actually all of them are older characters, so there's really no Kyrotech investment until you hit that G12 finisher. But outside of raiding, you're not going to use them for really anything. Kit Fisto does have a mission in territory battles. It's one of those missions that most people aren't bothering to waste their resources on. Our A tier are characters that, just like our B tier, are older. They aren't going to require that same Chirotech investment. However, they do have some degree of use outside of the raid itself. Right? Primarily, you're going to use them in a General Grievous squad, and then you also have Plo Koon, who does really, really nicely in a Starkiller squad, but his ship is also integral to the Negotiator, and bringing that up to higher relic levels really makes it shine. And our S tier characters are characters that players on the lower end are going to want to invest in pretty heavily. These are all characters that are required for Galactic Legend grinds, so investing in them, even if they're not the best character in the game, is going to provide dividends later on down the road when you're looking to build up those earlier, bigger farms, right? So that's just something to keep in mind for players who are trying to figure out where their investment should be. If you're on the lower end, you're probably going to be trying to look at characters in that B, A, and S tier and coming up with team compositions that work between those. So now to the bread and butter. Let's talk about box 1, and I'll explain what we're seeing here. Box 1 required score is 10 million for the entire guild. What that actually only means is that each player in the guild only needs to do about 200,000 points. And that doesn't seem a lot for somebody like me at almost 12 million GP, but that can be a relatively daunting task for somebody at the lower end of the game who's really struggling. We'll see under the suggested gearing compositions what my idea is for the cheapest way to get there, right? So one base difficulty squad will get you to that average goal. Your total buffer, if we hit max score, is how much leeway you have in scoring. So how much leeway you have in regards to messing up the battle, or just not doing well or not being able to max out. And then at the bottom here, we have our difficulty tier, which is really just for me, for color coding purposes and may be helpful to you as you look through the sheet. And I will say that I will make this sheet available through Reddit so that people can kind of boost around in it and link it to their guilds or whatever they need to do. Our suggested teams, again, this really comes from the raid server and talking with some of their members and trying to figure out what is reasonable for a player at this level. Obviously, something like Gungans does really, really well, but it's unlikely that a guild that is prioritizing box 1 is going to have Gungans available to them. Even if their players are farming those characters, they are so Chirotech heavy that it can be difficult. At this level, we see that Sith Seppi or that Darth Maul squad being the best investment for a player. I do want to remind you, though, that modding does play a role, and from what I'm told, this Darth Maul squad and this Darth Maul squad, Sith Seppi squad, it does really, really, really well in these earlier tiers. It kind of drops off somewhere in the middle in the relic tiers, and then it picks up speed again as Darth Maul starts to stack offense at the much higher tiers. So you'll see some shifts in our suggested team compositions, and our team scoring abilities are based on what we've seen from screenshots from other players, both at the higher end and at the lower end. Even if with this team you're only hitting 150 to 175,000 points, throwing in just a quick easy squad of leftovers should hopefully get the rest of it covered for you. It might take some practice, but this should be relatively easy, right? And we've done this for pretty much every box, and we don't need to spend a ton of time with each box. Again, this sheet will be made available to you guys so that you can see it, but just so that we kind of get an idea. Right, at box 2, we see that Luminara squad start to open up. I noticed that I didn't put a suggested score in here, so we'll fix that right now. But what I am told is that this team can pretty much max at any level. The unfortunate thing here is that in order for this team to do well, Luminara absolutely does need her Zeta. And again, for somebody at my level of the game, dropping a luxury Zeta is really not that big of a deal. For somebody at the lower end of the game, where we're talking about being in a Zeta crunch constantly, this can be a little bit of a harder pill to swallow. However, keep in mind that we're going to be doing this raid for about 7 more months, right? And being able to get more MK3 to relic things up in the later game is going to be significantly helpful for all players. It is something that I see as a really relatively low investment in regards to the returns that you're going to see over time. And when we talk about our box, we're really just talking about the guild box, but we also have to consider that personal reward track as well as kind of a back burner thing, right? So with box 2, we see that we need really just 2 base difficulty squads that can hit an average score, and that's only because we wanted to provide a little bit of a buffer. So in reality, if we were to take away this 1 squad, we'd see we could still hit our average for our guild, but our buffer will be significantly lower. Now, box 3, we kind of shifted it up, and I personally think that that 5-man squad's going to work a little bit better here. This is where that 3-man squad of Darth Maul kind of drops off just a little bit, but it's still a little bit easier for players to do. You only need an average goal of 450,000 points per player. That's really 2 squads, right? So 1 Gear 12 squad, 1 base difficulty squad. You'll notice here that I've actually put 2 scores with the Luminara squad, right? So that you kind of have an option. You can take this team to G12 for that 450,000. You could keep this team at the lower end, and you can do the same thing here with your Darth Maul squad if you really want to. These are not intended to be law when we're talking about the team compositions. These are intended to be ideas with scores that are backed up with having seen screenshots. If you really want to find the absolute best team compositions and strategies, once again, right, we can head on over to the Star Wars Galaxy of Heroes raid server, and we could check out their infographics, and we can get the information right from the source. I promise you, these guys are super, super, super helpful and really, really great at figuring this stuff out. Now, box 4, right? This is where we start to see the need for a Relic Squad. 500 million points needed, 1.35 million investment from each player. That's really only a Relic 3 squad, a G12 squad, and a base difficulty squad. You'll notice that I did put the Gungans in here, and the reason why we put the Gungans in for this squad is that as you start to hit that mid-game, I'm not saying you should farm Gungans, but I have noticed a lot of players have done so, especially with the bonus shards that we've been seeing over time. So this is an option for you. I personally recommend taking one of those squads to Relic 5, especially if you already got the Lightspeed bundle for Luminara. Just pop that Zeta on, get a few of your other characters up there, and you should be able to max it at the Relic 5 tier, which is 1.2 million points, and will meet your average goal. But again, we're just talking about the lower end, and we're talking about some of the easiest possible ways in terms of gearing to get to where you need to be for your guild, right? Box 5, 1.5 million needed. This is where we start to see a mandated Relic 5 squad, but really you only need 2 teams, right? 1 Relic 5 squad and 1 Relic 3 squad will give you a significant 500,000 point buffer. That Darth Maul squad does really, really, really well. You'll notice I actually took this and I threw a Relic 7 team comp in here, even though this is not what we're talking about at this level. And the reason that I did this is that at this point in the game, you're going to start to see people going for different Galactic Legends, and you're going to start seeing some of these characters just being at higher relics for the purpose of GL grind. So if you do have that available to you, you can use that. But rest assured, when we talk about our buffer, we are not accounting for a Relic 7 squad, and are instead accounting for a Relic 5 squad. At this point, I am still personally recommending going with the 5-man team with B2. because that Darth Maul team is a little bit harder until you've really ramped up and hit nice modding for offense. That Luminara squad, once again, does super well when we're talking about the Lightspeed bundle and Relic 5, and when we're talking about even going lower, as long as you have the Zeta. You'll notice, and I didn't mention this before, that after Luminara and Kit Fisto, really, two of our slots don't necessarily matter as much. There are better compositions and there are worse compositions, but as long as you have those two and follow basic strategy and have moderate modding capabilities, you should be able to hit max or close to max. If you're at the lower end, you can obviously throw in whoever your best Jedi are. GMY is a great option and is one of the suggested characters for that team, because at this point we're not looking at splits. We're not looking at trying to have a Beck-led team. So whatever you have in terms of strongest Jedi is probably preferable here after those 3 slots. And once again, we threw the Gungans in at just a very low level as an option to make up some points on the back end. When we get to box 6, we're starting to talk about things that are a little bit on the higher end. That's where your Darth Maul squad is going to hit that 1.3 to 1.8 million, which is really nice, even if you can't max, because our total buffer with 1 Relic 7 squad and 1 Gear 12 squad is 450,000 points. So even if you're not hitting max, you should be relatively good. Luminara, once again, does really well. We can, of course, just like we did going back here, have that squad bumped up a little bit higher if we'd like. It's important to remember that we're not looking at this sheet as a progression for your guild, but we're looking at this as a right now goal. So obviously you're not going to progress from box 5 doing 1.2 million points with Luminara and then regress down to 450,000. We are looking at guilds right now who are trying to find the path of least resistance to get their guilds to those average goals. This is the point where you might start to see a not a Jar Jar team, a Gungan team that is a little bit higher up. This is where you might start to see some people waiting for Jar Jar. The good news is you don't actually need Jar Jar Binks in order to max out the tiers with Gungans. They really don't do super great at that super low end, but they start to do really nice once you've unlocked their speed and once you've started to mod them fairly decently. You can, of course, get the Omicron for Boomadir. I have been told, and I've seen screenshots, where you don't necessarily need it. I personally have applied it myself as a nice quality of life thing. It's only 10 materials. Again, I can't necessarily recommend it, but if you're somebody who values their time over their resources, just do it. Make your life easier. And that box 7 squad is when we're going to start seeing relics only, right? This is where your Darth Maul squad is going to really start to shine. This is where you might see a lot of variability with your Gungan squad. Okay, I have seen people who have Relic 7, their entire Gungan squad at this point, still waiting for Jar Jar Binks, but obviously I know that that's not realistic for everybody. And then of course you have your Luminara squad, who right now in my graphic is at Relic 3, but if you bought that Lightspeed bundle, that's going to make your life a little bit easier. Now at box 7, our buffer is a little bit lower if we're only doing 2 teams, Relic 7 and Relic 3, so you may want to throw in a couple base level squads as well based on the player. Remember, some people really like to min-max, and some players do the path of least resistance. You are the person that's going to know your guild and your guild members a lot more than I am going to. And then at box 8, this is actually where my guild is focused right now and trying to hit, right? This is where we're starting to look. We're a 580 million guild that's more on the semi-competitive side. So some of our players are more free-to-play friendly and are taking their time. And it's going to be a little bit of a struggle for us. But this is where we start to see team compositions that are a little bit on the higher end. We're talking about guilds of players at the 9 to maybe even a little lower, like 8 to 11 million GP range. You're going to start seeing people with those full Jar Jar and Gungan squads. Again, good news, you don't actually need Jar Jar Binks. He does make things a little bit more reliable. This is where you're going to start reasonably seeing that quad mate team right? Which is a really, really great team because of the ROI on Duel of the Fates. Even though I'm still pissed at CG for that, I can't deny the fact that that event overall is a solid one for players to invest in. I personally, once I finished Master Qui-Gon, will be taking this entire team to R9, and I'm saving materials now in waiting to get that 3.6 million that is not featured here, but also to get Relic 9 materials on a more consistent basis. This is where your Darth Maul squad's going to do really nice as a 3-man. It really saved me in the last raid cycle. And this is where you're going to start to see people being able to bring their Luminara up even if they didn't buy the Lightspeed bundle, just for the raid itself, and being able to apply that Zeta without too much issue. Really, if we look at this, you only need 3 teams, a Relic 8 team, a Relic 7 team, and a Relic 5 team. And we can mix and match here, right? If you want to bring Quad May up to Relic 8, you can absolutely do that, and bring your Jar Jar team down to Relic 7. You can bring your Quad May team up to Relic 8, you can bring Darth Maul to Relic 7, and maybe your Gungans are your Relic 5. It doesn't matter. Remember, your suggested teams are just ideas for guilds at this level to show that it's not actually as daunting or as hard as we think it is as players. And once we get to box 9 and 10, this is where we're talking about players who are probably more interested in min-maxing their raid. I don't even want to look at the suggested teams, right? These are the things that I'm getting directly from the Star Wars Galaxy of Heroes raid server in terms of suggested team comp. So once again, we have their infographics here. But looking at team compositions, it's 1 maxed team Relic 9, 1 Relic 7 team, 2 Relic 5 teams, and a Relic 3 team. I personally have taken my Gungans to Relic 9, right? Kind of as a silly thing, and you see I have a little bit extra there. Kind of as a silly thing from the beginning. So I already have my Relic 9 team, but I personally recommend that 3-man of Quad May, just because it's only investing in 3 characters and there's some return on the back end. You'll notice that I do have the Omicron positioned here for Boomadir, but once again, it is not a necessity. It is something that you can do if you want to do. It is something that will save you time, but as long as you've modded your characters correctly, and once again, at this level, you should have significant modding behind you, especially if you farmed Jar Jar Jabba the Hutt. I recommend it for time purposes. It's not for everybody. I get it. GAC wins crystals, or however you want to see it. And then finally at that back box 10, there is some contention here in terms of what the best way forward is, but my personal opinion is 1 Relic 9 squad, 1 Relic 8 squad, 1 Relic 7 squad, and 2 Relic 5 squads. These are, again, the splits for the Jedi that I have seen personally from the raid server, from talking to Belloc over at the raid server, from talking to other members of the raid server, and trying to get the best idea for the highest squads possible. I will personally, just like I've shown on this graphic, be taking my Quad Beta R9, and my Jar Jar Binks team is already R9, so I'm likely going to see more of a 2 Relic 9 squad buffer here. You'll notice that the buffer is actually literally 0, which means that either you have to really spend the time maxing every single score every single time, or you might consider bringing something up a little bit higher. Again, for me, doing so, I get a 2.6 million buffer, right? Nope, let's change that up. For me, I'm getting a 3.6 million buffer, right? Now, let's do that. A 1 million buffer, there we go. Sorry about that. Just for bringing an additional team up to Relic 9, and I value it because, again, I value my time over anything else. Now, it's important to remember a couple of things here at the end, because I know in the comments people are complaining, talking, and saying different things. I am not saying that this raid is great, and I am not saying that it is tuned correctly. I completely understand that those lower tiers are tuned really poorly for the lower end player. I get that, I understand that, I acknowledge it. But I also understand that there's really not too much that I can do as a player in regards to making changes there for players. The best thing that I can do is show people how to get where they need to get. for their guilds. The other important thing to remember, like I kind of mentioned earlier, is that all guilds are going to have players that are tryhards, and all guilds are going to have players who are really going to skirt by. You're always going to have a player that has a real life emergency or is on vacation. So it's important that you as an officer or as a leader or even as just a member of your guild, that you do try to go a little above that average. And that a little above that average might be as much as 50,000 points if we're talking about box 1, but it might be as high as an extra million points when we're talking about box 10. I personally, once again, our guild is trying to hit this box 8 at this point, and I'm averaging about 6.4 million points, which gives my guild a little bit of leeway for each player, and the more players in the guild that are doing that, the more leeway that opens up for the players who are struggling at that point. So I'm going to leave you with that. Once again, I'm going to leave the Discord for the raid server down in the description. You will find on our Reddit thread. I will also leave the graphic and the sheet for you guys to look at if that's going to be helpful for you and your guild. And I am always available, as well as many other players are always available on our Discord, right? So you will find quite a bit, where is it? Quite a bit of really solid resources over here for players that need any kind of help. So with that said, peace out.